Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report for Saturday, June 16th, 2018, ninth year of Chungi, fifth month, and the third day by the heavenly calendar. Tim Elder King. Thank you, Tim Elder. Sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyungjin Moon. And let's start with our weather this morning. It's a bit nippy outside, 52 degrees at the Cheongguk, and quite clear, mostly clear. But I believe the king last night spent the night at Kukjinim's farm. I should say, actually, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, at the Inspector General's farm. And it's a bit probably in the upper 40s there, I would say. The elevation is a bit higher there than at Matamoros at the Cheongguk, so probably a few degrees cooler. So I hope that people, as they are probably getting up about now, maybe get a fire going or something so they can warm up. 83 degrees, though, during the day, so it's going to be a rather warm day. And tomorrow it's going to be even warmer, 87 degrees. And, of course, on Monday we're expecting it to be in the 90s. So we're in a warming trend, at least during the day, but the evenings and mornings are still rather cool. Let's see. Let's go to our Rima, and I'm in John chapter 7 this morning. On this page, the verse that catches my eye, that my eye is guided to, is verse 24, John 7:24. Where Jesus says, "Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment." And here again, there's a whole context to this, but I think sometimes God just wants us to look at that one single verse, not in the context, but just independently of what is being said in the Bible, but just have this apply this ourselves. Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. King has been emphasizing that in the kingdom of heaven, we will not be sitting on the beach, he says, drinking pina colada. I can't even pronounce the name of that drink. Pina coladas, is it? Or something thereabouts. Anyway, it's not going to be just, I think instead of that, I'll say Rocky Road ice cream. Yeah, we're not going to be eating Rocky Road ice cream. That's much easier to pronounce. But we're going to have our responsibilities. We'll be co-heirs with Christ, and we'll be exercising judgment over wickedness and evil, and we'll be rather active and rather busy. It's not going to be a totalitarian dictatorship just by Christ by himself, but rather that we'll be given responsibility. But Jesus here cautions us: judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. And that's giving righteous judgment is it's a challenge. If you see a situation and you are responsible to guide the people, in other words, to give judgment. Giving judgment then means once you've given judgment, you need to give guidance to the people who are involved so that they can improve their situation, or so that they can grow closer to God, and so that the situation, if it's a negative situation, can be diffused. But that depends on your ability to give righteous judgment. One principle that we have here is that we don't play God. We don't play God. That means that we acknowledge that we don't know how God is working through various situations, through various people, and we give God a chance to work. And don't play God. This is a phrase that has been given to us by the king, and it means that we, in many cases, rather than imposing a top-down solution, we allow, and the king allows, and he instructs us to allow situations to play out on the ground. And sometimes, if there's a conflict on one side or another is asking the king to intervene, or is asking me to intervene, and the king will say, or I will say, under the king's instruction, no, you guys work it out yourself. Especially where there is a situation where people are saying, you know what, the sanctuary leader in our area is someone that we don't like. We don't want to work with him. Well, there is an established a policy, an established solution for dealing with that kind of situation, and it is not to fire the existing sanctuary leader, but it is, as many of you already know, that another person can say, I would like to try my hand at leadership, so please, King, please anoint me to be a rival, leader in this area. And we will see which one of us, the people in this area, want to work with. That is the established policy for dealing with those kinds of conflicts. And the people in the area, the people on the ground, know better than us at headquarters which person is more capable, which person is more deserving of people's respect and cooperation. And so that's how these things can be worked out naturally on the ground. Top-down solutions from a headquarters that does not have the manpower, does not have the resources to, gather all the information over all situations and all locations around the world. Those top-down solutions often do not work, and in fact can make the situation even worse. We are not the NSA, we are not the National Security Agency, and we do not aspire to be the NSA. We do not want to have a system of spies and intelligence throughout the world telling us what is going on in each location, and we don't intend to create that kind of an organization. That's the whole idea of a decentralized kingdom, right? So because the kingdom of heaven is what? It's a kingdom of kings, and that means that we receive sovereignty from the second king, from True Father's representative body and heir on the earth, and we exercise our sovereignty as kings in the area where we are responsible. So that means that when there are problems, as much as possible, we work them out ourselves on the local level. So that is the best way to carry out righteous judgment. And there's been there are some people, especially those who think they are in the right, who prefer the top-down system. They prefer to use the authority of the king to impose their solution, to impose their position on others. But the second king is very firm in not doing that. Now here, I mentioned sort of very briefly at the beginning of the broadcast when I mentioned where the king is tonight. He is at the farm of the Inspector General. The king instructed me to do something new during the celebration for a day of True All Things. and the anniversary of the founding of the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity. He instructed me to refer to individuals who are part of the program as King so-and-so or Queen so-and-so. Now, and I did that. But then the issue comes, okay, what about Kukjinim? He has been very adamant, and well, adamant? Yeah, I guess that's the right word. He's been very adamant in his opinion that there should be only one king in true family, or in true father's direct lineage. He feels very strongly that, as I understand, and I think I understand him correctly, he feels strongly that if there is more than one king in true father's lineage, this is going to cause problems later on. And so you've probably noticed that he does not wear this kind of a crown or anything similar to it. Now, the second king has, for a while, was pressuring him to wear a crown. So what Kukjinim finally did, as I understand, was that he put a piece of string around his hat and said, "Okay, that's my crown." Because on the one hand, he respects and upholds his younger brother as the king, as his king. He recognizes his younger brother as his king. And from that position, he wanted to obey his king. On the other hand, this is my analysis and interpretation. On the other hand, he still felt very strongly that to have more than one king in true father's direct lineage was going to cause problems down the line, and he felt very strongly that he should set that tradition of there being only one king in true father's direct lineage. So, as a kind of a compromise, perhaps he put a string around his hat. And I don't know if I didn't notice on Thursday whether he was wearing that string or not. But anyway, you notice that he was not wearing this kind of crown, and also Chienim was also not wearing this kind of crown. So the king refers to me as King Timothy I. Now, I guess I am the first. I can't think of any others. But anyway, even if there was another King Timothy, it was illegitimate. So legitimacy only comes from God. So I guess I am the first. All right. Thank you, Heavenly Father. But then if we were to refer to Kukjinim as King Mungukjin or King Kukjin or King Justin, I don't think he would appreciate that. I'm guessing here. But I've given what I know about his position, I'm not sure he would particularly welcome that. So what do we do? Do we continue to call him Kukjinim? But that's strange, isn't it? Because now we are calling everybody else King da-da-da, King da-da-da. And just Kukjinim is just plain old Kukjinim. Nim somehow seems very mundane now. So what to do? Reverend Lee and I were discussing this. Reverend Lee Sang-yeol, King Lee Sang-yeol, who is the head of the World Peace Unification Sanctuary Korea. And he had, I think, the good solution. He pointed out that as with the second king, Kukjinim has a title that is given to him in the Cheonrigu Constitution, which is Inspector General, right? So, King Lee Sang-yeol said that, the solution is that we refer to him as the Inspector General, as opposed to King so-and-so, King so-and-so. That's probably, I think that sounds like a good solution to me. And so that is how I intend to refer to him from now on. So if you hear me say Inspector General, you'll know. And if someone asks I heard Tim say Inspector General on the King's Report. Well, what is he? Who's he talking about? You can explain to them what I've just said to you. All right. So that is that explanation from the Bible. Let's go to the Cheonseongeong. In Cheonseongeong, I'm on page. Let's see, in the electronic edition here, I'm on page 609. It looks like 609. And this is the book on the earthly life and the spirit world, chapter 2, section 3. To go to a higher realm in the spirit world, or maybe we could say how to go to a higher realm in the spirit world. Okay. And the subtitle is "The Standard for Religious People is the Spirit World." And I read that subtitle because I think the subtitle is translated correctly, but the sentence that I'm about to read, which has the same phrase, is actually translated incorrectly. And it says, what is the difference between those who are religious and those who are not? Those who are religious believe in setting the standards of the spirit world throughout their entire lives. Religion starts from the determination to meet and then live with God. The contents of the scriptures the founders of all religions left behind did not dwell on the details of human life. They taught about things which we can relate to the contents of the eternal, transcendent world based on the realm of God's existence. And I think there is an important mistranslation here that we need to correct. Let's see, those who are religious believe in setting the standards of the spirit world throughout their entire lives. But actually, as I said, the subtitle actually translates it correctly. The standards for the religious people is the spirit world. In other words, the Korean says that religious people set the spirit world as their standard. Set the spirit world as the standard for their lives, or set the spirit world as their standard throughout their lives. We can also put the word believe in there. They believe in the spirit world and set it as their standard throughout their lives. So as opposed to non-religious people, that is, people who don't know the existence of God and don't know the existence of the spirit world, set the physical world as their standard. For example, graduating from a certain university, or earning a certain amount of money, having a certain amount of zeros on your salary, a certain number of digits in your salary. Are you? If one person is earning $50,000, and another person is earning $500,000, and another person is earning $5 million a year, then the people who set their standard in the physical world will say, of course, then the person who earns $5 million a year is the most successful. He meets the standard. He best meets the standard of the physical world. Now, he may have been divorced 3 times or have 6.5 mistresses. I don't know about the half, but anyway, 6.5 mistresses, and so forth. But still, by the physical world, he drives a Mercedes convertible, and he vacations at the south of France or whatever, and so he's successful, and he meets the standard of the physical world. But those who are religious set the spirit world as their standard. Set the spirit world as their standard. So rather than that, people who are religious realize that our time here on earth, our time in our physical bodies, is a time for us to grow and complete our character, so that when we go to the spirit world, we will be able to live in harmony with God and in unity with God. True Father said that when we go to spirit world, the air that we breathe is love, and so and we need to we are not born with the ability to love at the perfection level, or the completion level. So we need to learn that, and we need to practice that. We need to train ourselves on that throughout our lives. And those who are religious understand this, and we practice that, and we train ourselves in that way, so that we can be ready in that sense when we finally go to the spirit world. And we know that we're going there. People who are not religious feel that, okay, this life is it. That's it. This is it. So I just have to, between the time of my birth and the time of my death, I just have to collect as many toys as I can. What's that saying? That the person who has the most toys at the end of his life wins, or something like that. In other words, toys meaning boats and cars and whatever, big house and whatever. And the person wants to be a part of the elite in this world because they believe that this is all that there is. The Rothschilds, are they successful? Well, by the standards of the physical world, they're very successful. By the standards of the spirit world, they are extremely unsuccessful. All right, that is our Rima for this morning. Okay, now let's take a break and we'll go into the news after the break, right? And welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, June 16th, 2018. King Tim Elder and Princess Yura Kim sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk Hyungjimun this morning. Yes, we have a very special guest. I'm very happy because, Yura is a university student. She goes to college at Bloomsburg University, yes. And she just finished her sophomore year there. She'll be starting her junior year in the fall. And she's come here to the Sanctuary Church. And while we were rearranging the stage, I took my gun away so that I would not be muzzling anyone. So let me put it back. But during the her summer vacation, she has come here to Newfoundland to help out in any way that she can, and she's been very, very helpful. And she actually often, in the Wednesday and Saturday King's Reports, she's often the only person sitting here in the audience, encouraging me and giving me spiritual support. And I've asked her before whether she'd like to come on, and every time she was saying no, but this morning she said yes. So we brought her up here. So thank you, Yura, for coming on.
You're welcome. I appreciate it.
Oh, good. And so I don't know. Is there anything you'd like to talk about? Anything special? What about this morning's Rima? Do you have anything to say about this morning's Rima? No? Okay, that's all right. That's all right. I will just play it by ear. Unless you have something to say. Do you? No? Okay. Yes? No? Okay. All right. So, but we're very, very happy to have her. She attends the King's Reports at the Palace every morning. And when she goes to the Palace, I'm really impressed at how helpful she is in doing everything. I mean, as soon as she enters the Palace, she grabs a broom. Yeah? She grabs a broom and she just starts sweeping any place. It's very, very wonderful to have her here. Let's see. I wanted to start out today with what's going on in the Korean Peninsula, because that's kind of the place where we're focused these days. And so Pat Buchanan has a very good column on that. But before we get to that, just to bring you up to date on the news that is coming out in terms of the follow-up to the Trump-Kim conference. The Hill this morning, or this is a story that was filed yesterday morning, about 20 hours ago. South Korean official is saying that an announcement is coming soon regarding the U.S.-Korea joint military exercises. I think it's pretty much a foregone conclusion now that those exercises are going to be suspended at least for this year. And that's something that has happened also in the past. And these exercises can be resumed at any time, so it's not a decisive thing, but it is an important political concession, and also militarily as well. It's a concession to some extent to North Korea. Just like to go through this article of The Hill. South Korea is expected to announce in the coming days a decision on the future of joint military exercises with the U.S. after President Trump said this week that he would suspend the exercises. A senior official in the South Korea's presidential office told the Associated Press that Seoul has been discussing a temporary suspension of the Ulchi Freedom Guardian exercises as well as others with the U.S. The official said that it appeared certain that the drills would be halted, according to the AP. Trump announced on Tuesday that he would suspend joint military exercises with South Korea after he signed a brief agreement with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un that offered Pyongyang unspecified security guarantees from the U.S. In exchange, the North reaffirmed its commitment to denuclearize. Still, Trump's readiness to give up the military exercises with South Korea marked a major concession to Pyongyang, which has argued that the drills are merely a rehearsal for an eventual invasion of North Korea. Trump told reporters outside the White House on Friday that he was the one to suggest suspending the military drills, insisting that they cost the U.S. too much money. Militarily, I call them war games. I hated them from the day I came in, he said. We pay millions and millions of dollars for planes and all this. Past U.S. administrations have held that drills are necessary to maintain military readiness. The agreement signed on Tuesday by Trump and Kim has also raised questions from some lawmakers and experts who have expressed concern about its lack of specifics. While the document commits the North to denuclearize, critics have pointed out that Pyongyang has agreed to as much in the past and later broke those promises. That's what it says at the end is certainly true. President Trump does seem to have a strong opinion about U.S. forces overseas and these kinds of military exercises. Of course, in the military, they're always training, right? They're always training. They train and train and train, as we do in a much smaller scale. We do that. We do the same thing as concealed carriers, because training really is important for when you're under pressure. Because when you're under pressure, you have to be able to. Many times you have to be able to move without thinking, and just move the way that you've been trained to. And so, if you're not trained, if you're not constantly training, then when the actual situation comes, in other words, when bullets are flying toward you, and you're thinking, "Oh, my life may end in the next 5 seconds," you don't have time to be thinking about what am I going to do next, or how am I going to do this, or what should I do first? All that has to come just naturally and instinctively, and that kind of that ability comes from training. And so, suspending military exercises, as it says here, does mean reducing the military readiness. It means reducing the effectiveness of the U.S. forces in times of actual war. Does that make sense? Okay. And so it is certainly true that President Trump has given a major concession to North Korea by suspending these exercises. They are important, and especially the joint military exercises, because the U.S. and South Korean forces have very different cultures. It's been said that the South Korean military is not so much of a military that is designed for fighting as it is for indoctrinating people to follow the government and to obey the government. And so these joint military exercises actually are probably more important for the South Korean military than they are for the U.S. military, because by working with the U.S. military, the South Korean forces are able to learn a lot from U.S. military. And that improves their ability, not just in terms of the the instinctive ability to act instinctively under pressure, as I mentioned, but also just in terms of some of the technical training that the South Korean military is able to receive from the U.S. military during these exercises. So I would say it has a greater effect on the military readiness of South Korean forces as compared to the military readiness of the U.S. forces. In other words, they need it more than we do. The South Koreans need it more than we do. But I think it is pretty much a foregone conclusion right now that is going to happen. The Straits Times of Singapore is also reporting that major U.S. exercises with South Korea suspended indefinitely, it says. This is a story in the South Korea Straits Times, which now that the South China Morning Post has pretty much become a mouthpiece for the Communist Party of China, the Straits Times may have taken its place as the most authoritative English language paper in East Asia. Major U.S. military exercise with South Korea suspended indefinitely. This is published Thursday, 5 a.m. Singapore time, so that would actually be the day before that, because they're 12 hours ahead of us. So this was published Thursday evening, I guess. But this is an AFP story coming out of Washington. The U.S. military has indefinitely postponed major joint exercises with South Korea, an official told AFP on Thursday, acting on President Trump's pledge to halt provocative military drills following his summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. And they here have the word provocative in quotes because that's how President Trump described the military exercises when he first mentioned this suspension while he was still in Singapore. And that's important because provocative is the term that North Korea has been using in its propaganda against the U.S. And now the U.S. president has adopted that term from North Korea. And so that in itself is very symbolic. And I think the North Koreans, I'm sure, picked up on it as well. The move, a significant break on how the U.S. and South Korean militaries have worked together for decades, came even as Secretary of State Mike Pompeo warned that the peace efforts still face risks and insisted sanctions must be maintained until Pyongyang dismantles its nuclear arsenal. But this is not the first time that these exercises have been suspended. I mean, these suspensions have occurred in the past, so it's not something that is unprecedented. So it's important to keep that in mind. The critics of President Trump will emphasize how this is, a major concession. But it is a concession, and it's an important concession. But it's not the end of the world. The sky is not falling. Major military exercises, this quotation here, major military exercises have been suspended indefinitely on the Korean Peninsula, unquote, a senior U.S. official told AFP. Trump on Tuesday had said the U.S. would halt, quote, war games, unquote, with its South Korean security ally, but he did not make clear when the freeze would kick in. U.S. and South Korean forces have been training together for years and routinely rehearse everything from beach landings to an invasion from the north, or even decapitation strikes targeting the North Korean regime. And Pyongyang typically reacts furiously. Following drills last year, North Korea fired ballistic missiles over Japan, triggering global alarm. And what's happened here, though, is basically the U.S. has agreed to what China was proposing prior to the Singapore summit. China was proposing that, listen, why doesn't North Korea stop or suspend its missile launches, and the U.S. and South Korea suspend their military exercises, which on the face of it seems reasonable, but you have to realize that the missile launches from North Korea are very aggressive and are they're not defensive, they're offensive, whereas the military exercises were defensive, not offensive. So to compare those two, to put those two on an equal level, is misleading. But this kind of course, this kind of tactic is what Soviet Union used to do, and also the leftists in America were doing it during the 60s and 70s as well, and 80s as well. But so to say, okay, if you stop your offensive tactics, we will stop our defensive tactics. This is not the same. It's not the same. But that's what's happening. And so it's kind of a concession to China as well. It's saying, okay, China will adopt your solution. Let's see. But critics have pointed to the vague wording of the non-binding document, which Trump described as a deal, and to concerns among allies about the decision to stop the U.S. South Korean war games, unquote. That's Trump's phrase. Speaking on a regional tour to brief South Korean, Japanese, and Chinese officials about the historic summit, Pompeo said Washington remains committed to the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of North Korea. We believe that Kim Jong-un understands the urgency. We must do this quickly, he said, of the efforts to have North Korea abandon its atomic arsenal. In Beijing, Pompeo also said China reaffirmed its commitment to the United Nations sanctions after the Foreign Ministry suggested earlier this week that the UN Security Council could consider easing the economic punishment against the Cold War ally. We truly believe that we have a path forward after so many years that can bring peace unquote, Pompeo told Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi before talks with President Xi Jinping. But he warned, that's Pompeo's warning here, quote, there are still risks that we won't achieve that goal, and more work needs to be done. Any reduction in tensions on its doorstep is welcome for China, North Korea's closest ally, which accounts for around 90% of Pyongyang Strait. Well, this is, I don't know why they would say that, because China has actually been using this tension as a leverage against the United States. So they don't want war, but they also don't want a complete cessation of tension either. They want to keep, North Korea playing against the United States. Speaking alongside Wang, Pompeo said the UN resolutions have mechanisms for sanctions relief, quote, and we agreed that at the appropriate time that those would be considered, unquote, stressing that any relief would come only after, quote, full denuclearization, unquote. For his part, Wang said China has a, quote, firm commitment to denuclearization, but that North Korea's, quote, legitimate concerns must be addressed. North Korean state media reported Wednesday that Trump had not only offered to stop military exercises during the dialogue, but also to lift sanctions imposed on Pyongyang, causing concern in Tokyo and Seoul. Earlier, South Korean President Moon Jae-in acknowledged that, quote, there may be very conflicting views, quote, unquote, about the summit, but it had still helped mitigate the fears of a nuclear war. South Korean Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa appeared, meanwhile, to sidestep the issue of military drills, saying the matter would be left up to military authorities to discuss and that the U.S.-South Korea alliance has remained as robust as ever. While it's not directly involved, Japan also considers the exercises vital. Yeah, because, if South Korea goes communist, then Japan becomes the frontline state. So Japan is watching this whole situation very, very carefully. In other words, if South Korea comes under the effective control of the Chinese Communist Party, then Japan becomes the frontline state against that. Harry Harris, who until last month headed the U.S. military's huge Pacific Command, has been a staunch advocate of the military exercises. And he's now President Trump's nominee to become ambassador to South Korea. But he told U.S. lawmakers on Thursday that his position had changed. Quote, the whole landscape has shifted, and I believe that we should give major exercises, a pause. Quote, Harris told senators at his confirmation hearing to be U.S. envoy to South Korea. In the latest step to ease cross-border friction, the two Koreas held their highest-level military talks in over a decade Thursday in the demilitarized zone that divided the two countries. In a joint statement, the two sides agreed to restore their military communication lines and to halt hostile acts, Yonhap News Agency reported. And Russian President Vladimir Putin conveyed to a senior North Korean official an invitation for Kim to visit Russia. So all of a sudden, this guy's really popular, isn't he? As he praised the results of the summit. But we'll see in a minute from the Buchanan column why Kim Jong-un is so popular and what he may or may not want to do to keep that popularity. Buchanan will talk about that in just a minute. It was, without doubt, just the first step towards a full-blown settlement, Putin said. Trump had raised eyebrows by describing his own country's drills on the Korean Peninsula as, quote, provocative, unquote, a term used by the North for the exercises. And Pyongyang described its nuclear weapons and long-range missiles as a shield against U.S. aggression and has in the past linked denuclearization to the removal of U.S. forces from the peninsula. North Korea's propaganda machine embraced the summit, with state television airing footage Thursday describing Kim as a universally revered, prominent world leader. Trump on Wednesday declared that the nuclear threat from North Korea no longer exists and tweeted that people can sleep well tonight. Harris, however, disagreed. I think we must continue to worry about North Korea's nuclear threat, he said. Now, some people may wonder, how is it that North Korean media can describe Kim Jong-un as a universally revered leader when he couldn't even pay his own hotel bill? And actually, I was discussing this as well with King Lee Sang-yeol, and he had some interesting input. That the way that the North Korean media plays this is that, okay, so North Korea developed its nuclear missiles, and now North Korea is so powerful that the United States came begging for a summit and said, we so much want to meet you. We are so desperate to meet you that we will pay all of your expenses to come to Singapore. You see? That's how the North Korean media will want to play this. In other words, that President Trump just said, "Okay, you're Mr. Kim Jong-un, Chairman Kim. We know that you're a very busy man, and but we are desperate to meet you. We really want to meet you. So we will, or someone else will bear all the cost of your trip to Singapore, because we so much want to meet you."
Okay.
You see that? See that? So that is why they did not want to pay their hotel bill. You get it?
Yeah.
Right? We'll even send a plane. I think China provided the plane because North Korea's planes could not fly that far without a refueling stop. And actually, so China Airlines provided a plane. But again, you see, this is just, that again, is just shows how much the world respects and reveres Kim Jong-un, that they even provided a plane for him to travel to Singapore. That's how the North Korean media plays this. So again, they have a completely different mindset. It's a completely different world. When we're talking to North Korea, it's important that we understand that this is how they work. Now, let's go to the Buchanan column now. If I can find that. Where did I put that? Oh, yeah, it's okay. It's over here. Okay, I got it. All right. So Pat Buchanan published this on Friday. At very early Friday. So I guess he wrote it Thursday, unless he was staying up very late. And it's titled "Trump's Bold Historic Gamble," and I'm getting this off of Buchanan.org. And this is what he says. President Donald Trump appears to belong to what might be called the Benjamin Disraeli School of Diplomacy. Pat Buchanan, by the way, what did he do for President Nixon? Anyway, he was part of the Nixon administration. So anyway, called the Benjamin Disraeli School of Diplomacy. The British Prime Minister once responded, "Everyone likes flattery, and when you come to royalty, you should lay it on with a trowel." In other words, if you're going to talk to a king, just really, really do a heavy flattery offensive. And this is what obviously what President Trump did with Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un is royalty. He's a king. He's a satanic king, but he's a king in his country there. Totalitarian king and not a godly king, but he's a king. And so President Trump treated him that way and really laid on the flattery just incredibly thick. At his Singapore summit, Trump smartly saluted a North Korean general and then lavished praise on Kim Jong-un as, quote, a strong guy, unquote, with, quote, a good personality, unquote, and, quote, a great negotiator. He's funny and very, very smart and a very strategic kind of guy. His country does love him. Those are the things that President Trump said about Kim Jong-un. Predictably, Trump is being scourged for this. Yet during his trip to Peking in 1972, Richard Nixon did not confront Chairman Mao on his history of massacres and murder, though Nixon's visit came in the midst of Mao's Cultural Revolution, a nationwide pogrom. Yeah, the Cultural Revolution, many people died, starved to death. Nor did Churchill or FDR at their wartime summits confront their ally Stalin. Their ally, the Soviet Union was an ally of the United States and France and Britain during World War II. And when they met to discuss what to do with the war and how to conduct the war, the American president, the British prime minister, did not confront Stalin about how many people he was killing, how many people he was starving to death in his own country. Both actually gushed over, quote, Uncle Joe. That's how Stalin was known, Uncle Joe. Still, if the Trump-Kim camaraderie goes south and the crisis of 2017, when war seemed possible, returns, Trump, as he concedes, will be charged with naivete for having placed his trust in such a tyrant. Yet, to Trump's credit, we are surely at a better place than we were a year ago when Kim was testing hydrogen bombs and ICBMs, and he and Trump were trading threats and insults in what seemed to be the prelude to a new Korean War. Whatever one may think of his diplomacy, Trump has, for now, lifted the specter of nuclear war from the Korean Peninsula and begun a negotiating process that could lead to tolerable coexistence. The central questions to emerge from the summit are these: what does Kim want, and what is he willing to pay for it? Transparently, he does not want a war with the United States. That black cloud has passed over. Second, Kim and North Korea have emerged from their isolation in as dramatic a fashion as did Mao's China in 1972. In 2018, the North was invited to the Seoul Olympics. Kim met twice with South Korea's president and twice with China's Xi Jinping. Vladimir Putin's foreign minister stopped by, and now we read just from the Straits Times that Putin has invited Kim Jong-un to come to Moscow. And Kim had a face-to-face summit with a U.S. president, something his grandfather and father never came close to achieving. It is unlikely Kim will be retreating back into the cloisters of the Hermit Kingdom after being courted by the world's foremost powers. What does Trump have on offer to induce Kim to end the lifetime of hostility? It is a long menu of what Kim can expect if he will surrender his nuclear weapons and dismantle the factories and facilities that produce them. Among the benefits proffered, recognition of his dynasty and U.S. security guarantees, an end of sanctions, foreign investment, a peace treaty signed by the United States to replace the 65-year-old armistice, and the eventual withdrawal of U.S. forces from the Korean Peninsula. Trump has already attended to one of Kim's complaints. The joint military exercises we have conducted annually with South Korea for decades have been declared by Trump to be, quote, war games, unquote, and quote, very provocative, unquote, and have been suspended. What is being asked of Kim in return? He must provide an inventory of all nuclear weapons and where they are hidden, surrender them all, dismantle his plutonium and uranium production plants, and shut down his testing sites, all under the watch of U.S.-approved inspectors. He must renounce any and all nuclear weapons forever and accept a regime of international inspection that would guarantee he never cheats on that commitment. Here is where the crunch comes. This is the important part here. Kim is being told that he must give up the weapons whose very possession by him are the reason why the world powers are paying him heed. As leader of a country with a per capita income smaller than Haiti's, you thought Haiti was poor? North Korea is even poorer in terms of per capita income. So as a leader of such a poor country, Kim is being told he must surrender the weapons that placed him and North Korea in the world's most exclusive club, to which only 8 other nations belong: the U.S., Russia, China, Britain, France, India, Pakistan, and Israel. Those are the countries that are known to possess nuclear weapons today. Will Kim, whose nuclear weapons have enabled him to strut on the world stage and trade insults with the President of the United States, give them up to become the leader of a poor, backward nation with half the population of South Korea and not even 4% of the economy of the South? Will he give up his most reliable deterrent against an attack by the United States or China? In the Kim-Trump relationship, this is where the rubber meets the road. Kim has seen how Americans treat nations like Gaddafi's Libya, Saddam's Iraq, and Iran that decline to develop or surrender the kind of weapons his country took decades to plan, test, produce, and deploy. Should Kim give up the nukes, what U.S. president would fly halfway around the world to meet him one-to-one? Hence the crucial question: will he ever really give them up? Well, Buchanan doesn't give the answer, but that is, of course, a rhetorical question, and the answer is no. Kim Jong would be a fool to give up his nuclear weapons for all the reasons that Buchanan listed here. All right? If he gives up his nuclear weapons, he's just the head of a poor country, poorer than Haiti, which is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And North Korea would be even poorer than that. It is poorer than that. And the only reason people pay attention to it is because it has nuclear weapons. But it is being asked right now to give up those nuclear weapons. So where's the logic for North Korea? It isn't there. It isn't there. So Pat Buchanan is right. North Korea will not give up its nuclear weapons. So this is the scenario that I've been saying is playing out. President Trump's intention here is to set the condition for a military strike. We are not actually getting farther away from war. We're moving ever closer toward war on the Korean Peninsula. Because if President Trump does all of this, I gave him everything. I suspended the military exercises. I even called them provocative, which is what the North Koreans, how the North Koreans describe them. I called them war games. I floated the possibility, at least, of withdrawing U.S. forces from South Korea, which I think he will actually do. 5 years at the outside, maybe 2 to 3 years, and maybe faster than that. Because I think President Trump wants U.S. troops out of South Korea. So anyway, that was a concession to North Korea as well, he will say. And I showed him a video where we would build condos on the beach. We will build condos on the beach, and there will be all these, and North Korea will become as rich as South Korea, which means that they will become 25 times as rich as they are today, because the North Korean economy compared to South is about 25 to 1. And I told him we'll make them as rich as South Korea. I did all of this. I gave him everything he wanted, but he still would not give up his nuclear weapons. So what choice do I have? What choice do I have now? The only choice I have now is to remove those nuclear weapons by a military strike. And China, I'm sorry. I know that you're not going to like this, but we're going to hit North Korea, and we're going to bring North Korea into the U.S. sphere. We're going to unite North Korea centering on Seoul, centering on some kind of a democratic government that is at least neutral and if possible, more aligned with the U.S. than it is with China. That is China's nightmare. In 1950, when there was the Korean War, well, first let me back up to earlier in 1950. In early 1950, Dean Rusk, who I think was Secretary of State at that time, gave a speech where he said that the defensive line of the United States went from Japan down to the Philippines. And North Korea, Kim Il-sung looked at that speech and said, "Wow, look, the United States is saying that the Korean Peninsula is outside of its defensive line. The United States is saying we're not," because already the year before that, in 1949, U.S. had actually withdrawn all of its troops from South Korea, and in early 1950, Dean Rusk gave this a speech, and it clearly said that the United States defensive line excluded the Korean Peninsula. So Kim Il-sung goes running to Stalin and to Mao Zedong and said, "Look! If I attack South Korea, the United States is not going to help South Korea. So give me the support that I need to do this." And they said, "Okay, yeah, go ahead, knock yourself out." And so he attacked South Korea, and it took some time for the U.S. to revamp its forces, but finally General MacArthur did, and after the invasion of North Korea on June 25th, it took the U.S. a couple of months to get up to speed, but eventually they did. And so in September, General MacArthur staged that invasion behind the North Korean lines through the Incheon landing, and that was about the second week of September, I think, and by a month later, within a month, the North Korean military was defeated. The North Korean military was effectively defeated, and the U.S. forces were up all the way up past Pyongyang, all the way north of Pyongyang, and on the west coast, and even further up in the central part of the country. And South Korean soldiers were filling their canteens from the water in the Yalu River. And there was a famous picture, a photograph of that. So China said, wait a second. We gave Kim Il-sung permission to push the South Koreans or the South Korean government off the peninsula and bring the entire peninsula under communist control. But instead, Kim Il-sung has brought the U.S. forces onto our border. This is not what we intended. This is not at all what we intended. This is our worst nightmare. We don't want the U.S. forces sitting on the banks of the Yalu River. And so they, in mid-October, started their invasion of the South, or of the Korean Peninsula. And they basically took over the war. They took over the North Korean military. And so after that, because the South Korean military had been basically taken over by the U.S. by that time. So after that, it became a war between the United States and China from October 1950. And China managed to push the UN forces, officially UN forces, 16 nations and all that, but effectively U.S. forces, back down below the 38th parallel, and not as far as they had been pushed down the first time, but maybe about halfway down South Korean territory before the UN forces were able to stop the Chinese and to push back up beyond Seoul again. So Seoul changed hands a number of times, and finally in 1953 they came to an agreement, and the front line at that time then became the military armistice line, and that's where it's been for the last 65 years. But now China's looking at this and saying, this could go bad for us again. What happened in 1950, that nightmare that we experienced in 1950, might happen again here. We might again, if we're not careful, we might again see U.S. forces on the Yalu River. We don't want that. We didn't want it in 1950, and we definitely don't want it today. So China's kind of worried right now. I mean, it could go very well. Of course, China wants U.S. forces withdrawn from South Korea and all that. That's true. But these things sometimes go in unexpected directions, especially when you're dealing with someone like Kim Jong-un, who doesn't like China, and Trump, who also doesn't like China. So Kim Jong-un does not like China. I mean, think of it. His uncle, Chang Song-taek, was sort of China's man, point guy. He was Chang Song-taek was China's man in the North Korean regime, and Chang Song-taek was supposed to be kind of a father figure to Kim Jong-un, kind of giving him adult supervision, sort of, to help him guide North Korea more towards China, more towards what China wanted to see. China wanted to see North Korea develop along the same lines that they have developed. In other words, establish special economic zones, for example, and bring in Western investment, and so make that and hopefully that would create a more stable regime, because China wants North Korean regime to be stable. To be able to maintain that status quo as a buffer against South Korea and the U.S. military. But what did Kim Jong-un do? He killed his uncle. He executed his uncle. There was a big leader of party leaders, and Chang Song-taek was sitting near the front, I think at about the second or third row, and with Kim Jong-un on the stage. And while Kim Jong-un was watching, security guards came in. 2 security guards came in, picked up Chang Song-taek out of his seat and took him out. And he was actually fed to a bunch of hungry dogs. That's right. That's how. That's the story, and it seems to be true, that he was executed in a very gruesome manner. And his Kim Jong-un's aunt, the sister of his father, was so upset that she actually she somehow died. Either, I don't know if she committed suicide or she just died of heartbreak or whatever. But anyway, she also died. So that's basically what Kim Jong-un thinks of people who get too close to China. And I think the message has gotten out pretty clearly to the rest of the North Korean leadership. And China is aware of this. And of course, you know, Xi Jinping invited Kim Jong-un to Beijing once and then to another city sort of halfway between Pyongyang and Beijing the second time to sort of kind of smooth things over. But still right now, China does not really have an effective voice in Pyongyang as far as we know. So China has to be worried. Kim Jong-un was educated in Switzerland in his boyhood. He likes the NBA. He liked Dennis Rodman, and I guess that still goes true today, I suspect. And he likes watching Hollywood movies. He likes America. He doesn't like America being on the Korean Peninsula, but in general, he likes America. More than he likes China, I would say. I doubt that he speaks Chinese. He probably speaks some. You know, I mean, if he spent time in Switzerland at a private school there, he probably speaks some English. He may even speak some German. I don't know. What was it? Some former State Department official was describing him as a multilingual. So, but I'll bet Chinese is not one of those languages that he speaks. So China, I think, has to be a little bit worried about where all this is going to lead to. So we'll see. You know, so all of a sudden now China is asking to be North Korea's guarantor. China is somehow trying to find a role for itself in these negotiations because, you know, Trump and Kim Jong-un in the same room deciding the future of the Korean Peninsula. China's very uncomfortable about that. Not really sure they like what's going to come out of that. So somehow they're trying to find a role for themselves here, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens, and what China will do. What China will do to try to get back into this situation. But hey, they were warned. They were warned. In April of last year, when Xi Jinping came to the United States and met President Trump at the Mar-a-Lago in Florida, President Trump told him very clearly, "We want you to solve the North Korea problem. But if you don't, or you can't, we will." That's what President Trump said to Xi Jinping. Maybe not in those words, but I think the message was pretty clear. Well, now we're in that we will stage. And China is being left out, like it or not, because they had a chance. You know, they had many chances. They had many chances, but they chose to just sort of muddle through and say, oh, you know, it's good to have North Korea as a kind of a distraction for America, and when America pressures us about the South China Sea or about trade, then we can always use North Korea as a card, and we can always say that, oh, well, you know, remember, you need us for the situation in North Korea, so don't pressure us too hard. Well, now guess what? Guess what? We don't need you anymore. We don't need you anymore. We don't need you anymore because we got our own conversation going with North Korea. Okay, let's take a break, and we'll come back. All right? Okay. Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, June 16th, 2018. And King Tim Elder and Princess Yura Kim sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyungjin Moon. And the princess has some questions. And my experience with her is that she is very good at asking very basic questions that others don't think of. And so I wanted her to ask some questions about, she has some questions that we were talking about during the break. And what is the first question that you want to ask?
So, who are you talking about when you say nation?
Okay. For example, which nation are we talking about?
For example, China.
China, okay. So it depends on the country, but with China, of course, when we say China is this way, China is that way, we're talking about the Chinese Communist Party. There are officially 1.3 billion, probably more like 1.6 billion or something like that, people in China. But it's the Chinese Communist Party, and more specifically, it's Xi Jinping, because he is the dictator of China. And so he sets the direction, he sets the policies, and these are carried out by the Chinese Communist Party. And then the Chinese Communist Party will give instructions to the government or to the military. So basically, we're talking about the Chinese Communist Party. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. And another question?
What's the...
During the break, you had a whole series of questions. What happened?
I don't remember what I said.
All right. Defense and offense.
Yes.
Yes. You have to ask the question.
Is defense and offense have same power, same kind of level of power?
And also about military. You were asking about military.
Yes.
And what was that question?
I can't put it in question.
You can't remember?
I don't know.
Yeah, in a conflict, for example, in Cheongguk, we will have the ability to defend the country. If someone tries to attack our country, we will have the readiness, we will have the preparations to defend the country. And this is what peace militia, peace police is all about, right?
Yes.
So any country has to have the ability to defend its sovereignty. If it doesn't have the ability to defend its sovereignty, then it's going to get taken over. If it's just say, we will just have no defense at all, we'll have no military, we'll just hope that the countries around us will love us and agree not to attack us. But in the history of the world, that has never worked. Always a country has to have the ability to defend itself, and that's the role of the military. That's the role of soldiers. So even Japan, which after World War II had a constitution that said it could not have a military, still it has what it calls the self-defense forces, which is actually the strongest military in Asia, in terms of the at least in terms of its some aspects of the Japanese, but because Japan needs to be able to defend itself.
Then how are they doing it?
How is
it working?
Well, Japan has not been attacked, so I guess it's working pretty well. Of course, the United States has been defending Japan as well. But Russia has not invaded Japan, or Soviet Union did not invade Japan, and China has not attacked Japan, and North Korea has not attacked Japan. South Korea has not attacked Japan. So, and Japan has been able to defend itself for the, what is it now, 73 years since the end of the Second World War. It's been able to defend itself, and without any kind of a military, whatever you call it, whether you call it a military, whether you call it a self-defense force, but without any kind of an armed force like that, a country cannot continue to exist. Eventually, it will be taken over by another country.
What do you mean by taking over?
Be conquered. It'll be the country will be conquered.
is Japan training?
Yes, the self-defense forces are always training. Yes. And that's important for a military to always train. Always train. Because when an actual war happens, you won't have time to be thinking, oh, how am I supposed to do this? What am I supposed to do now? How do I receive my orders? How do I make my reports? How do I cooperate with other units in this on our side? These kinds of things have to be learned through training, and they have to be automatic when the actual war happens, when the actual emergency happens, because then you're not going to have time to think. You just have to rely on your training. So it's important for militaries to train all the time. And so all militaries will always be training. They will always be training.
To defend
defend, yes.
To be prepared when they are attacked.
Yes. And that's what, here too, we do training. Peace militia, peace police, that's what our training is about. To develop the skills, but also, and the second king often talks about muscle memory. Have you heard him talk about that?
Yes.
So muscle memory means that you can just do things without thinking about them. You can just do things without thinking about it. And you can, for example, in our case, let's say loading and reloading a gun, for example, just to be able to do that very quickly without even thinking about it. And that's a small example. Or even the various techniques used in jiu-jitsu, just to be able to do something without even thinking about it. Just your hands and feet just automatically move there. And that's similar. That's similar on a much smaller scale, but it's similar to what the military needs to be able to do.
The second king is always talking about love God and love your neighbor, and protecting neighbor. To protect the neighbor, to protect their life, is the most important thing, right? That's why we train to how to load the gun to protect our life.
Yes, and we learn jiu-jitsu and gun skills. Yes, yes, to protect ourselves and our neighbors. Yes.
So, but there are many ways to protect.
Yes, there are many different ways. Yes, depending on the situation.
But we are training to. Using gun means to kill the bad people, and that's the ultimate protection. Is that it?
So guns are used in specific situations, and not in every situation. Guns are used when you could say it's a last resort. But if I use my gun, it'll be in a situation where I say to myself, or I can see myself, that if I don't use my gun now, I will die, or my neighbor next to me, or someone that I love is going to die. So I have to put down that bad guy now, or something as bad is going to happen. You know, and in many cases, even if I have a gun, I will not use it. That's why empty-handed skills are important. So, for example, if my life is not in imminent danger, or a person that I'm trying to protect is not in imminent danger of losing their lives, it may not be appropriate for me to use the gun. It may not be legal for me to use the gun. So, in that case, even if I have a gun, I will have to keep my gun in the holster and use empty-handed skills. So that's why it's important to have a range of skills, or also pepper spray or something like that. In some cases, may be appropriate, or some other. So the gun is not the only defensive tool that we should use. It's one tool, and that has to be used in specific situations, and those situations are outlined in the law. It's when, for example, when I feel that I have a reasonable belief that I am in imminent danger of death, serious bodily injury, rape, or kidnapping, or someone that I want to protect is in that situation. So those are very specific situations where I would use a gun, but not in every situation, obviously. Does that make sense? Okay. So
Yes.
keep doing jiu-jitsu.
But why jujitsu?
Well, it's a very effective empty-handed skill as compared to, and like the king said, it's not just jiu-jitsu either. He also does with the Philippine knife fighting, and he teaches other things as well, right? But jiu-jitsu is what he calls a real martial art. It's not like many other martial arts would basically teach you forms, but are not very useful in actual fighting. So jiu-jitsu teaches you how to actually fight. If someone is attacking you, how to defend yourself with your hands and feet. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
But you can think that other martial arts can be effective too, right?
They might be, but if you find something that's more effective than jiu-jitsu, I guess you're welcome to do that. The king's judgment is that jiu-jitsu is the best way. But if you find something better, I guess that'd be good too. But right now in the fighting world, we see that the jiu-jitsu people are able to defeat others. Boxing, for example. It could be good to learn boxing as well. Do you want to learn boxing?
No.
No? Why not? Be good to be good for you to learn boxing, maybe. Okay.
But you can get sources from many different places, right?
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
The training also can be done by doing other kinds of martial arts.
Martial arts, yes. Do you want to try something else?
I'm just curious why it's jiu-jitsu.
Right.
And
Well, the king has been studying martial arts since he was a teenager, and he has studied or looked at various martial arts, and on the basis of his observation and experience, he feels that jiu-jitsu is one of the most, not the only, but one of the most effective ways. But that's not the only thing that he teaches, though.
the most effective way to
defend yourself.
defend, to protect my life.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, you don't sound convinced. So, yeah, if you want to, look at various martial arts and say, you know what, I think this other one is better. If you come to that conclusion, I suppose that would be good. But the king he's been, what is he now? But 25 years he's been looking at this situation, and so he has a lot of experience in this area. So I am inclined to put a lot of faith in his experience.
Yes, I understand that.
Okay.
Yes. I just don't.
You think there might be something better?
No, I don't know. I don't really understand to protect your life.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about the tools. It's not about the skills. But why do you do jiu-jitsu?
Why do you do jiu-jitsu? To protect your life. To be able to have the skills to protect your life and the people around you, to protect your neighbors. Do you think that's important?
Yes.
Okay.
But
All right?
yes.
Okay, let's move on. All right, in other news, still things are going on in Washington. I think we're really tired of this, but things are still going on there. Cash-strapped New York City cabbie commits suicide. Erdogan bans Uber. That business is finished. I guess it's the Uber business in New York City that's putting pressure on the cab drivers. It's terrible that a person commits suicide, but it is the free market, but there needs to be an environment where people can, can afford to fail without committing suicide, and that really is an issue for the family. In Cheongguk, I think we will have stronger families, and the families and the community around the families will act as a safety net. Let's see what happened here. This is an article in the New York Post, and you may have questions about this. Let's see. Another cash-strapped city cabbie has committed suicide, this time by hanging himself in his Brooklyn apartment, the Post has learned. Abdul Saleh, 59, is now at least the sixth for-hire driver to kill himself since November, sources say. A roommate found him hanging by an electrical cord in his apartment in Flatlands Friday morning, said his driving partner, Kamar Chadari. Saleh drove a yellow cab for 30 years, Chadari said. Chadari is 36 years old. Chadari said that they leased a taxi and medallion together, splitting the night and day shifts, but that within the past several months, Saleh couldn't make the weekly lease payment. Saleh, whom Chadari described as single but with family in his native Yemen, sometimes would be short by as little as $60, but for the last payment he was $300 short. Making finances even tighter, Chadari began driving for Uber, leaving Saleh without a partner. Chadari said he last spoke to Saleh 3 or 4 days ago. He sounded upset and depressed, Chadari recalled. He said he didn't feel good. I know he wasn't making enough money to pay the lease, he said. He was short here and there, and I used to have to help him out. He said he didn't know how to survive. New York City Taxi Workers Alliance Director Baravi Desai lamented the plight of Saleh and others facing rising competition from ride-hailing services, in other words, like Uber. These drivers can no longer see retirement in sight and can't imagine continuing to work such a grueling job until their last day on earth, she said. In the past 8 months, 5 other cab and livery drivers have killed themselves in the face of financial strain. In May, cabbie Yu Main Kenny Chow flung himself in the East River off the Upper East Side. In March, a cabbie Nicanor Okesor, 65, hanged himself in his garage in Maspeth, Queens. In the most dramatic case, livery driver Douglas Shifter killed himself with a shotgun outside City Hall on February 5th. He left a Facebook post reading, "I don't know how else to make a difference other than a public display of a most private affair." All right, so I'm not too familiar with the cab situation in New York City. I do know that they have to purchase basically what amounts to a license. The medallion that's referred to here is a license, a cabbie license, and these are sold, and apparently they cost quite a lot of money. I think in the tens of thousands of dollars, isn't it? Let's see, how much does a NYC cab medallion cost? So it's not a free market situation, and in Cheongguk certainly cabbies will not be licensed. There will be, because the Constitution says that, or at least for the federal government anyway, it says that federal government cannot license. But I guess, let's see. Here we go, yeah. Medallion prices have skyrocketed in recent years, up 50% between 2000 and 2009 and 14 to a high of more than $1 million. Some drivers own their medallions, but often medallions are owned by companies that operate fleets of taxis. So basically, these are licenses to operate a taxi. So yeah, if it costs $1 million, then you can. I don't know how much this guy was having to pay in a lease, but we can imagine it's quite high. Now, I correct myself because the Constitution, of course, is a federal constitution, and so local governments may be able to do this kind of thing. But, you know, Uber is a... Have you ever used Uber? You have? I've never used Uber. How is it? How did you... What was your impression?
It's really useful. You can find the Uber with your phone wherever you are. For example, in New York, you can find using the app, and you can call the taxi and ask him to drive, like
to wherever you're going.
Wherever you want to go.
So, given a choice between a yellow cab and an Uber, which do you choose?
Uber is much cheaper, I think.
Much cheaper? And is it more convenient as well?
Yes.
So there you go. That's market competition, isn't it? It's cheaper, it's more convenient, and you can use an app. So, you know, anything with an app has got to be good, right? It's sort of more modern, right? So you can call it with your phone. So, yeah, I can see how cabbies are having a tough time. I don't know, how old is the guy that died? 59. So a 59-year-old man and a 36-year-old man were working together, and they were having trouble making ends meet with a yellow cab. So the younger guy, the 36-year-old guy, started driving for Uber, and the older guy stuck with the yellow cab, and it didn't work out for him. Yeah, it's a very sad situation. Very sad situation. But sad, but that's how the market goes, right? I mean, the customers want to go for something that's cheaper, right? And more convenient. And so we need to be able to adjust to the market. But in Turkey, Erdogan bans Uber. That business is finished, he says. So you cannot use Uber in Turkey, I guess. Disease X fear, new strain of bird flu kills half of those who contract it. Chicago strip club cancels Stormy shows because she wants more money. Stormy Daniels is really making a lot of money out of her notoriety. President says Cohen no longer his lawyer. Feds recover 731 pages of encrypted messages. Special counsel heat after IG report. Yeah, the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, this came out. We didn't have a King's report on Thursday, so we kind of skipped over some things, and I think we want to actually go through this today, because the Inspector General's report was quite scathing towards the FBI, but so for some reason decided that Comey was not politically biased. That's kind of what, but anyway, let's look at what the Breitbart says about the Inspector General's report. FBI employee, Trump's supporters are all poor, uneducated, and lazy POs. Anyway, not sure what that is. The Justice Department's Office of Inspector General report on the FBI handling of the Clinton email investigation reveals a bureau staffer made remarks attacking the deplorables, the voters who elected Donald Trump. On November 9th, 2016, one day after the 2016 presidential election, an FBI staffer disparaged Trump voters to, quote, FBI Attorney 2. They don't actually give the names. They call them FBI Attorney 1, FBI Attorney 2, according to the exchanges published in the report. And one guy says, here, this is a transcript. One guy says, I'm very upset. And number 2 says, ha ha. And the next guy says, I'm so stressed about what I could have done differently. And first one says, don't stress, none of that mattered. Next one says, the FBI's influence. Another one says, I don't know, we broke the momentum. And next just says, that is not so. The next guy says, all the people who were initially voting for her would not, and were not swayed by any decision the FBI put out. Trump's supporters are all poor to middle class, uneducated, lazy POs that think he will magically grant them jobs for doing nothing. They probably didn't watch the debates, aren't fully educated on his policies, and are stupidly wrapped up in his unmerited enthusiasm. Thank you very much. I voted for Trump. Bernie Sanders is the one that's promising a job for everybody. He says everybody can have a government job if they want one. He doesn't say how he's going to pay for that. He doesn't say how he's going to pay for that. Moments later, the attorney lamented how a Trump presidency would erase the Obama administration's legislative achievements. Quote, I just can't imagine the systematic disassembly of the progress we've made over the last 8 years. ACA is gone, unquote, the attorney said. Quote, who knows if the rhetoric about deporting people, walls, and crap is true. I honestly feel like there is going to be a lot more gun issues too. The crazies won finally. This is the Tea Party on steroids, and the GOP is going to be lost. They have to deal with an incumbent in 4 years. We have to fight this again, unquote. And another guy says, and Pence is stupid, said the attorney. When Justice Department investigators asked if the comments demonstrated a political bias, the attorney said, quote, personal political feelings or beliefs in no way impacted the staffer's work undertaken on either the Clinton email probe or the Russia investigation. What do you think? Do you think they're biased? Does it sound like they might be biased?
Can you summarize that, Eric?
Yeah, it sounds like they might be biased. They were saying, they were saying that the people who voted for Trump were stupid, right? All poor to middle class, uneducated. That's how they, lazy, POS, I don't know what that means, that think he will magically grant them jobs for doing nothing. So he said that people who voted for Trump were uneducated. They didn't watch the debates, and they think that President Trump will give them things for doing nothing. That sounds like they were biased. Okay. And let's see, going back to Drudge now. So the Inspector General's report was critical, and we'll see what the fallout from that is. We haven't seen much fallout yet, but I'm sure that fallout is coming. Let's see, I've got a bunch of pages here that are all trying to refresh at the same time. It's preventing my Drudge from coming up. There we go now. Okay, let's see, chimps and orangutans could be completely extinct by the end of the century. All right, well, okay, we'll wait till the end of the century. Argentine peso resumes its plunge. This is the kind of thing that can happen. The value of the Argentine currency keeps going down because people don't want to invest in that country, and people in Argentina want to get rid of their own currency and buy dollars, and so the value of the currency keeps going down, and that makes it more expensive then to import things. And so the country's economy is in a very difficult situation. And they've gone to the IMF, but that doesn't seem to be working this time. German immigration drama could spell end for Merkel, stands firm against demand to close borders. Outrage over white woman selected to perform Selena tribute. In Bloomsburg University, are there many foreign students?
Oh.
No? Are there many Korean students?
We have many Chinese people coming to study abroad, and other European people coming to study abroad for like first just 1 semester or 2 semesters, but not for coming for 4 years. So there are not many foreign.
Not many more. So does that make it a better environment for you, or?
Yes, it's a nice environment because I don't speak Japanese or Korean. So
Yes. Yura, by the way, is fluent in both Japanese and Korean, as well as English, as you can see. Yeah. So, yeah.
So I can improve more English. That's helpful.
And what is your major there? I know already, but I want you to tell everybody else.
Well, I'm majoring art.
In art, I see.
Yes. But I don't want to go deep in about that.
Okay, you want to go deep into that. All right. Okay. But in Europe, the reason I bring that up is because there's this difference between Germany and the United States, especially where the Chancellor Merkel, Chancellor is the same as basically the same as Prime Minister, says that a lot of people should be allowed to come into Germany. Here in Associated Press, Merkel stands firm against Bavarian demands to close borders. So basically, the borders of Germany are open in the sense that they're allowing many refugees in. German Chancellor Angela Merkel remains firmly opposed to unilateral moves to turn some refugees back at the border, her spokesman said Friday, warning such action, demanded by conservative allies in her own government, would weaken the European Union. Tempers within the government have frayed over the issue in recent days, and the dispute has raised questions over Merkel's future, as nationalist forces already in power elsewhere in Europe turn up the heat on the long-serving chancellor for her welcoming stance toward migrants. Germany's problem, you see, is that they're not having very many babies. And so their population is going to go down over the next decades unless they bring in new people. And that seems to be one of the reasons or one of the justifications that Merkel has for allowing people in. But of course, as the king has pointed out very, very well and very often, bringing in people from an Islamic culture means that you're bringing people in who are not going to assimilate into the existing culture. They come with values that are very different from the Judeo-Christian values, which even though the European Union wants to deny God and wants to deny Judeo-Christianity and wants to pretend like Judeo-Christianity is no better than any other religion, Judeo-Christianity has actually formed the basis for the prosperity of Europe today. And so, and to bring in a culture that is antithetical to that is going to create a very different civilization in Europe, which, for one thing, does not believe in having a woman as the leader. Angela Merkel is going to be out of a job if Germany becomes an Islamic country, because Islamic countries don't have women as their leaders. Although Pakistan did for a while, but that was a special exception because that was because of her father. Anyway, among Merkel's sharpest critics is Bavarian Governor Markus Söder, whose Christian Socialist Union is taking an increasingly hard line ahead of a state election this fall, even though it forms part of the national governing coalition. Söder and his party leader, Horst Seehofer, Germany's interior minister, want to send police to the southern border to turn back migrants who have registered as asylum seekers in other European countries. Merkel has warned that such a move could shift the burden onto countries such as Italy and Greece that have struggled to cope with the influx of migrants coming across the Mediterranean. We must not contribute to weaken the European Union and purely national measures setting the tone again in Europe, said Merkel's spokesman Stefan Siebert. Then Europe wouldn't play the strong role in the world that's required now, he told reporters in Berlin. So you can see how the European Union fundamentally is not working. Because, as this person said, they admit that they cannot allow nations to have sovereignty. That's what he's saying here, right? He says, we must not contribute to weakening the European Union and purely national measures setting the tone again in Europe. Purely national measures, that means sovereignty. They don't want individual nations pursuing their own interests. But that's what sovereignty is about. That's what sovereignty is about. In a sign of how jittery the German establishment has become, a hoax tweet suggesting Seehofer had broken up his party's decades-old alliance with Merkel's conservatives was picked up widely by German media, briefly sending the euro currency into a nosedive against the dollar. Other members of Merkel's government turned to name-calling Friday, with Andrea Nahles, the leader of Germany's center-left Social Democrats, accusing Söder of behaving like a bonsai Trump. I have no idea what that means. What do you suppose bonsai Trump means? Bonsai is Japanese. You know Japanese.
Yes.
I know Japanese too, but I have no idea what this means. Behaving like a bonsai Trump? Okay, well, a bonsai is a small tree, basically, that's in a pot, and you cut it here and you cut it there in order to make it look sort of artistic, right? So how is someone behaving like a bonsai Trump? We'll have to talk to a German expert sometime. Maybe someone can message me if they know the answer here. Okay, if you know the answer and you know my phone number, please message me. So anyway, someone is acting like a bonsai Trump. I'm sure that makes sense in German. Nahles said her party, which also is a member of the governing coalition in Berlin, backs Merkel's call for a Europe-wide consensus on how to tackle the issue of irregular migration. Irregular, that means illegal migration. Irregular migration. Irregular. Okay, I guess that's the politically correct word now. We won't allow the panic of the Bavarian state government to take all of Germany and Europe hostage, she said. Söder said his party, which is fearful of losing voters to the far-right Alternative for Germany in the Bavarian election on October 14th, wants to put the needs of our population center stage. His words echo those of populist politicians in other European countries such as Austria, Britain, and Italy, where fear of migrants has tilted politics to the right in recent years. Commentators in Germany have noted that the spat is one of the biggest crises for Merkel, who was recently elected for a fourth term with only a narrow majority. However it ends, this week's crisis has underlined that there are limits to her power. Wolfgang Bosbach, a member of Merkel's Christian Democratic Union, told broadcaster NTV on Friday that some in her party side with Söder on the issue. Söder's CSU and Merkel's CDU campaigned together in national elections and have a joint group in the national parliament. The German government has already imposed numerous measures to reduce the influx of refugees since 2015, when the number of migrants coming to Germany peaked following Merkel's decision not to close the border to people coming through Hungary and Austria. Seehofer was quoted Friday as telling the daily Süddeutsche Zeitung that it was Merkel's CDU that brought about the division of Europe with the refugee decision in 2015. He complained that in this week's standoff, a senior CDU official had portrayed his party as, quote, provincial lords who don't understand the European idea. So this is how the elite look down on people who are trying to protect local sovereignty. It's, oh, you're just a provincial lord who doesn't understand the European idea. This European idea, what is that? That is the idea that Europe should become one country with a centralized power in Brussels. And this is what Angela Merkel, who, by the way, was raised in East Germany, she was raised in a communist country. And although her father was a minister who ostensibly was was working against the communist government, okay, I think people are trying to tell me what a bonsai Trump is. Let me see here. A mini Trump, he says. Oh, I see a mini Trump. Okay. Oh, wait, this comes from our tech team. I thought it was someone from far away. Okay, a bonsai Trump is a mini Trump. I see. Okay, like a bonsai is a mini tree. A miniature tree, I see. So a miniature Trump, I see. Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's how the elite are looking down on these provincial lords, as they call them. Germany, a country of some 80 million, now sees about 11,000 new asylum seekers per month. Of these, some 30% could end up being turned back at the border if current European Union rules on asylum are applied, according to German officials. German finance minister, a social democrat, seemed to suggest that further intrigue within the coalition could end in a bloodbath. The task of governing our country isn't an episode of Game of Thrones, but a serious matter, Olaf Scholz said on Twitter. All those involved should never forget this. All right, well, yes, so, but Germany is, of course, slowly killing itself through this migration thing, bringing more and more people in, and somehow trying to make excuses for that. So they're in kind of a dilemma, though, because their population keeps going down, or their number of babies anyway keeps going down, and their population will start to decrease pretty soon, over the next decade or so. And the reason that that's important is because to maintain a certain economy, you have to have a certain number of people. If you don't have many people, then it's more difficult to create a prosperous country. And so if Germany's population goes down, then their economy will shrink, and their influence in Europe will shrink. So it's important for a country to be able to maintain or grow its population. The World Cup is being played out in Russia this month and next, but apparently there are a lot of empty seats, and FIFA can't figure out why. Okay, well, I'm sure they'll figure it out. Apple signs Oprah, original programming push. I don't know if she's going to run for president. I don't feel like she is. It doesn't seem like she's doing the things that a person normally would if they're planning on running for president. Super Soul, Tom Brady opens up on anthem kneeling and spirituality. In Hawaii, it's raining green crystals. And Ocean's 8 stars blame dominance of male critics for film's mixed reviews. It's always the man's fault, isn't it? Because the reason that their movie is not doing well at the box office is because the people who are reviewing the movie and publishing reviews of the movie are mostly male, are mostly men.
Why?
I don't know. That's what they're saying. Gaudy screening from hell audience walks out as movie trashed. Scores 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. Okay, I guess we're not going to see that one. Stress test, a saliva swab detects workplace. Wait a second. My page keeps jumping around here. Workplace burnout. Saliva swab detects workplace burnout. Stabbing followed hot sauce incident. Democratic hope tattooed iron-pumping West Virginia candidate breaks the mold. Major League Baseball sees sharp drop in attendance. Orioles' $161 million slugger in danger of worst season ever by player. Grandmother kills rabid bobcat with bare hands. A grandmother killed a rabid bobcat with her bare hands. Wow. And Boston Globe pleads break up Google. Competitors banished into oblivion. Yeah, the breaking up of these large tech companies is becoming more and more important. 100 years ago, the government finally broke up Standard Oil, the large oil company, and that was important for for developing today's American economy. And right now, the tech companies are presenting the same problem. Let's see what the Boston Globe has to say about that. Never in history of the world has a single company had so much control over what people know and think. Yet Washington has been slow to recognize that Google's power is a problem, much less embrace the obvious solution, breaking the company up. The Boston Globe is a pretty liberal, in other words, leftist newspaper. This is interesting. This is their editorial board speaking. Google accounts for about 90% of all internet searches. By any honest assessment, it holds a monopoly at the very gateway to information in the modern world. From there, the company's power radiates outward, dominating everything from maps to smartphone operating systems to video distribution, vacuuming up huge quantities of highly specific data about users along the way. So here they have a graph here. Search engine market share in 2018. Google is 90.1%. Bing is 3.2%. Now, Microsoft is trying very hard to push Bing, but it's not going very well, is it? Baidu, that's a Chinese, is 2.2%. Yahoo is 2.0%. Along with Facebook, Google owns sites and services that, by some estimates, influence 70% of all internet traffic. Not coincidentally, the two companies also form a duopoly that gets 73% of all digital advertising in the United States and virtually all the growth in ad spending on the internet. Once the lifeblood of a vital free press and later of a vast array of independent sites serving every possible interest, ad dollars increasingly flow to two tech giants that organize information produced at other people's expense. Google's power is bound to grow still more. Last year, it spent more on federal lobbying than any other company. See, that's how big companies and big government work together. Big companies spend a lot of money lobbying the government, and what are they doing when they lobby? They're saying, please pass this kind of a regulation so that we can do business better and so that small competitors will have more difficulty. See how that works?
So they are arrogant?
Well, they're greedy, yes.
Greedy?
Yes. They want it all.
To earn more money?
More and more money, yes.
To become famous?
No, to have more money. To buy more yachts, more houses, bigger houses. To buy more diamonds or whatever. Okay? So, Google's power is bound to grow still more. Okay, it spent more on federal lobbying than any other company. By tweaking the way information appears on search pages, Google can already promote its own websites and banish competitors to digital oblivion. Last year, European regulators fined the company $2.7 billion, alleging that it favored its own services over competitors. In coming years, as Google's vast data trove feeds ever more sophisticated artificial intelligence algorithms, the search giant's lead over its competitors will lengthen. In the meantime, the company keeps getting bigger. When it can't beat competitors, it buys them, as it has done more than 200 times since going public. Increasingly, startups aspire not to dethrone Google, but to be acquired by it. It comes as little comfort that fellow giants Facebook, Amazon, and Apple hem in Google here and there. Competing in an information economy shouldn't require a market capitalization of $500 billion or more. Yet the problem at hand is not merely economic. A handful of people working at a handful of tech companies steer the thoughts of billions of people every day, notes former Google design ethicist Tristan Harris. A recent study of 10,000 people from 39 countries suggests Google has likely been determining the outcome of upwards of 25% of the national elections in the world for several years now, with increasing impact each year as the internet penetration has grown. So there's real meddling. You talk about Russia? No, it's Google. It's Google that is determining the outcomes of upwards of 25% of national elections in the world. And it's been doing that for several years. Because when you search on Google, you're really only looking at the first page, right? Even though you get 25 million results. You're not going to go through all 25 million. You're just going to go through basically the first page. In fact, just the top half of the first page. Maybe even just the first 3. So, and Google decides what's going to be there. And websites that introduce conservative viewpoints, for example, might be down on page 5. And that Google gets to decide that. And so that's how they can influence the way that people think. Why is a breakup of Google so unthinkable? Google's products are undeniably convenient, and at least on the surface, they're free. Average users are paying not with money, but with their personal data. Do you understand this? That when you use Google, you're not paying, right? You're not paying money. But you are giving them something.
Why?
You're giving them your information about you.
Why?
Because when you say, for example, what is a typical search that you might do? Let's see, you might search for what?
China.
China? Okay, so then already Google says, okay, Yura Kim is interested in China. And then you search for China, and then you click on something on a particular page, right? There in the search results, and then Google says, okay, she's interested in that particular page. So over time, they develop more and more information about you. And then what do they do with that information? They sell it to advertisers.
Well, that might be wrong.
They go to an advertiser and say, you know what? We know what Yura Kim wants. We know what she wants to buy. And we know how much she's willing to pay. Here's the information about Yura Kim. And they get that. Then they get money from the advertiser. So the advertiser can sell you something. So you think that you are using Google for free, but you're giving them information about yourself. And they are using that information to gain money. So think about it. We're using Google for free, but the people who own Google, or the top staff in Google, are very rich, right? So where are they getting their money? They're not getting it from you and me, who are just searching on Google every day. They're getting it from advertisers. Because they provide information to advertisers about you and me. You see? So it's not free for us. Not free.
Okay.
But people don't realize that, especially I think young people don't realize that. Let's see here. The company has a near spotless public image. The famous maxim from the company's early years, "Don't be evil," helped cement Google's public image as one of the good guys. But they've removed that motto now from their company's motto. It used to be when they first started, their motto was "Don't be evil," don't do bad things. But now they've no longer saying that. It is ironic that the company perhaps most responsible for unleashing a tidal wave of human creativity, learning, and yes, competition, is also stifling it. It is frustrating competition, discouraging innovation, punishing American business, and distorting the free marketplace of commerce and ideas. Europe has led the wider fight over the right to privacy and the regulation of data, but the time is right for the United States to lead on dismantling tech monopolies, starting with the most powerful player. So how to start? So let's go through that just a bit here. Ironic that a company perhaps most responsible for unleashing a tidal wave of human creativity. Well, there were search engines before Google. I remember using other search engines. At one time, Yahoo was pretty strong, actually. And there was another one. What was it? Alexa or something like that that we used to use back in the 90s. Unleashing a tidal wave of human creativity. Yeah, because we could put something online. We could write something or put a picture and put it online, and Google would show it to people, and people could get income from that. That would support that. So and learning, of course. Can you imagine doing your homework without writing your paper without Google? Yeah. But we used to do that. We used to go to the library and go through a card catalog. I don't know if they still have card catalogs. Do you know what a card catalog is? See that? They don't even know what a card catalog is. So anyway, yeah, learning, and yes, competition is all, but now it's stifling it. It is frustrating competition because now it's Google is picking the winners and losers. You know, the people or the sites that the pages that come up on the top of the Google search are the winners. Discouraging innovation, punishing American business, and distorting the free marketplace of commerce and ideas. Wow, I'm going to have to go to a library sometime and see if they still have a card catalog. Scroll down, it says, and this is what the Boston Globe suggests in terms of breaking up Google. There are several ways to carve up Alphabet. Alphabet is the holding company of which Google is by far the largest and most important piece. And let's see, okay. The particular lines of division are less important than the act itself, it says, but one of the most promising splits would be to separate Google search from the rest of the company's ventures and open up the market for the advertising that goes along with search to other vendors. Okay. Another option would divide YouTube and Google's advertising units into standalone companies and separate them from Alphabet's other ventures. YouTube, for instance, is estimated to be a $15 billion a year business with 1.5 billion monthly users. So it's the same thing. I mean, when we use YouTube, we don't pay to watch a video, right? We don't pay to watch it. But again, we are giving YouTube information about us so that YouTube can sell that information to advertisers. So there are little advertisers at the bottom of a video often. You know, at the bottom of a video, there's some advertising. Here, buy a pet dog. You know, do you like dogs?
Yes.
Yes, see that? So the advertiser say, okay, Yura likes dogs, so we'll try to sell her a dog. So they put a little advertising there. How do they know that? Because YouTube has sold that information to them. Okay? Alphabet doesn't release official breakdowns of the company's revenue. If accurate, that would represent more than 10% of Alphabet's ad revenue and about 5% of global search. So they're talking about the $1.5 billion figure. Okay? And then what else do they say? If the advertising units like DoubleClick and AdMob were spun off into standalone companies, meanwhile, it would introduce more competition into the digital advertising market space. A more aggressive approach would also make standalone companies out of YouTube, Android, and Google's cloud services, Gmail, cloud storage, Maps, etc., separating all of them from Google search. Yeah, so author through your emails. Did you know Google is reading your emails? Yeah, they're reading your emails. They're looking for keywords there. So, for example, if you send an email to someone, say, "Oh, I wish I had a puppy," Google is reading that, and they will sell that to an advertiser that is selling puppies. Or, you know, Maps also. You know, if you are searching for a pet store, they will sell that information to an advertiser. So it's really it's kind of a surveillance, watching what people do, watching how people behave, because a lot of our actions and a lot of our behavior now takes place online, and Google is watching all of that, and then they are aggregating that, taking that information, then aggregating it, and then selling it to advertisers. Okay. The company recently announced that its cloud business has grown to a healthy $1 billion per quarter, with more growth projected. Meanwhile, splitting off the Android operating system and its associated elements would fundamentally change Google's relationship with the booming mobile market with future for search and advertising. The future for search and advertising, yes. And that separation is critical to restoring real competition. So Boston Globe wants to separate search and advertising. Look at the corporate structure of Alphabet, and you'll see a company that spans dozens of fields: email and thermostats, mobile phones and driverless cars, artificial intelligence, and virtual reality. So these are the things that Alphabet is doing: email, thermostats, mobile phones, driverless cars, artificial intelligence, and virtual reality. But look at the ledgers, and you'll see that Alphabet is primarily an advertising company that dabbles in blue sky technology projects. More than 80% of the company's revenue comes from advertising, ads on search results, commercials on YouTube, and across the Google ecosystem. Google controls 88% of the search advertising market. If you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Maybe too blithe way of putting it, but that's ad-driven business model that's been so wildly successful. See, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. You're what's being bought and sold. Your information. How do you feel about that? Are you okay with that?
No.
No? But what are you going to do about it?
Well, I can't do anything.
That's right, we can't do anything. That's the reality we're living in. But what we can do, though, is, as Boston Globe is trying to do, to pressure the government to break up Google, to bring about more competition. Sounds like it might be a good idea. That's come at a steep cost, especially full disclosure for the publishing industry. Billions of dollars have been reallocated from creators of content to owners of monopoly platforms. All content creators dependent on advertising must negotiate with Google or Facebook as aggregator, the sole lifeline between themselves and the vast internet cloud, notes Jonathan Taplin, author of Move Fast and Break Things: How Google, Facebook, and Amazon Cornered Culture and Undermined Democracy. A lot of channels on YouTube now are finding that their ad revenue has gone down because YouTube has, which is owned by Google, has decided not to place ads on their videos. Now, for example, there's one channel that I like to watch. It's called China Uncensored, and they give a lot of information about what's going on in China, not the official information, unofficial information, and they give the kind of information that China does not want people to know. And they talk to dissidents, and they have various sources inside China. And YouTube has said, okay, your videos are too controversial, so we're not going to put ads on your videos. So, but they are professionals. They're not doing this as amateurs. They put up a video about how many do they put up? About once every 3 days, I would say, they put up a video. And I don't know if they have other jobs, but they spend a lot of time doing this. About 3 or 4 people do this. And they do a lot of research, and they do a lot of editing, and they have expensive equipment. They have a studio that they have to maintain. I don't know if they rent it or what, but they have to maintain it. So they depend on that ad revenue, or they were depending on it in order to do that. But Google, or because Google wants to have a relationship with China, stopped putting ads on their videos. So there's no more ad revenue. So what do? Well, now they've had to go to they have to rely on donations now through Patreon. Do you know about Patreon? Do you know about that? Do you use Patreon?
Not that much.
Okay. I use Patreon to support this particular channel. I say, okay, I will pay them. I will donate, or I will pay them $1 each time that they produce a video. But I said, okay, but I'm setting a monthly limit though of $20. I'm not going to pay more than $20 a month. But each time they produce a video, I'll pay them $1. And a lot of people do that. A lot of people have done that. So now they have enough money to maintain their YouTube channel even without ad revenue, or at least, I think they may still be getting some ad revenue, but they've replaced a lot of the ad revenue that they had lost as a result of Google choosing not to put ads on most of their videos. So Google has that kind of power; it can make or break people. Fortunately, we have Patreon, so that some of that power is undermined, but it's still Google still has a lot of power. Taplin has proposed some tools that could help tame Google, short of breaking it up. One would be to reassess the 1998 Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which grants almost total immunity to tech companies for copyright violations by their users. YouTube now earns billions of dollars in ad revenues off of user-contributed clips. But under the law, it's up to the individual writers, musicians, and filmmakers to chase down piracy of their work. The law reflected the zeitgeist of the early Internet era, when any whisper of taxation, regulation, or copyright obligation looked like an existential threat to fledgling tech firms, but circumstances have clearly changed. In the early years of the Internet, it was really kind of, it was kind of good, actually. It was kind of very free for all, and you could almost do anything on the Internet. Now more and more regulations. Another tool would be to prevent Google from acquiring additional tech companies like Spotify or Snapchat. Indeed, the Justice Department should be taking a closer look at the acquisitions by all the major tech platforms. When Facebook took over Instagram and WhatsApp, the Obama administration shrugged as if the social media giant were just buying a couple of faddish apps for kids, rather than eliminating future rivals. A third option would be for the government to regulate Google like a public utility, forcing it to license out its algorithms, for instance, to help spur competition. This is akin to what the government did in 1956. A consent decree required AT&T to license all its 7,800 patents royalty-free in exchange for allowing the company to continue to maintain its telephone monopoly. Some services, the logic ones, are natural monopolies. An upstart search engine is no more likely to outmaneuver Google than an upstart phone company was to bring up new phone lines from coast to coast. In the end, though, regulation of the Bell system wasn't enough to create a dynamic telecom marketplace. 3 decades later, the Justice Department forced the company to split itself up. I'm talking about the Bell telephone company. To be sure, a consensus about how best to break up the company developed only after years of public discussion, after AT&T's power broadly and about the specific intricacies of its vast holdings. Similar debate preceded the Justice Department's actions against Microsoft in the 1990s, which helped companies like Amazon, Facebook, and Google flourish. For that to happen with Google, Americans need first to start talking about it. So this is what we can do. Start talking about it. Like this. In the early days of Alexander Graham Bell's telephone company or John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil, few realized how much influence either firm would come to exercise. Similarly, we need to shift the way we think about the dominant tech platforms, especially Google, which have steadily grown within most Americans' adults' living memory, from scrappy startups into forces dominating the economy. Our public debates about these issues need to accelerate, too, moving at the speed of technological change rather than the speed of past precedent. Bewailing the power of tech platforms is not enough. The United States needs to develop regulatory and, yes, antitrust strategies for each of them. Google is a monopoly because we've allowed it to become one. We've allowed it to grow at the expense of copyright holders, at the expense of rival search and advertising ventures, at the expense of startups that might someday challenge the giants, at the expense of a narrowing of the way a society acquires information. Today, the act of searching for an answer is synonymous with Googling. And the first answer for how to rein in this digital giant is also the best. Break it up. Just for fun, let me do a search. How to break up Google or Alphabet. Okay, so suggested searches. How, or best way to break up alphabet, Let's see what I get here. Let's see what Google tells me. I'm doing this search on Google. It's taking a long time. Taking a very long time. Can't find an answer. Oh, here we go. How to break up alphabet. Probably told me to divide it at L. Here we go. How to break up alphabet. Splitting an alphabetical list into equal chunks. There you go. They didn't understand the question. Okay, here we go. Oh, the second one is good. How to break up Alphabet, Amazon, and Facebook. Salon.com. But then the third one, simplifying packet pickup on race day. Colorado race timing. Yeah, they're not understanding the question. I don't think they want to understand the question. Sort a list alphabetically and split it into groups from A to E, etc. Okay. Splitting a master list into 3 separate lists based on... here we go. Eric Schmidt says, Alphabet will never break up. There you go. That's Google's answer. Yeah, see, that's how they decide. You know, these are the answers that they put up here at the top of the search.
What about breaking up Google?
Breaking up what?
Google.
Breaking up Google. Okay, how to break up Google. How to break up Google. All right. Okay, actually, the first one to come up is the article that we just read. Break up Google, the Boston Globe. Okay. And over here on the right, I get, how satisfied are you with these results? And they want me to answer a question. Very satisfied, very dissatisfied. But see, if I answer that question, I'm giving them information about me. So I'm not going to answer the question. Breaking up Google is not the way for Europe to grow. See that? A negative article. Yeah? Opinion. Is it time to break up Google? The New York Times. And here, break up Google and Facebook if you ever want innovation again. Why breaking up Amazon, Google, Apple, and Facebook could save something. Okay. How to break up Alphabet, Amazon, and Facebook, Salon.com. Is it time to break up the tech giants such as Facebook? The conservative case for breaking up monopolies such as Google. Well, Boston Globe is definitely not a conservative paper. So that's why I wanted to read that, because it was interesting to see that in a what is basically, a liberal, very liberal paper. Okay, let's continue through the headlines. So talk about it. Let's talk about it, all right? Let's talk about breaking up Google. Talk. U.S.-China announced new tariffs and escalation of trade war. Canadians boycott American products, cancel vacations. Report the National Guard soldiers sent to border are shoveling manure, changing flat tires. Now, the interesting thing about the American military is that they often defend other countries' borders.
Why?
Well, because, for example, in South Korea, they're defending the border between South Korea and North Korea, right? Or they will go to, or in Japan, the U.S. military in Japan is hoping to defend Japan. In other words, to defend Japan's border so that other countries such as so that Russia or China cannot invade Japan, right? And they go to other countries too to defend the borders of those countries. U.S. military is stationed in 150 countries, and basically they are helping to defend the borders of those countries.
So they are using foreigners to defend the country?
Yes. They're using U.S. soldiers to defend their country. But there's one country that the United States military cannot defend the borders of, and that is the United States. Do you know why? Because there's a law that says that the United States military cannot be used to enforce domestic laws.
What's that mean?
Well, it means that the United States military cannot be used inside the United States.
Why?
Why? Because, well, at least according to the law, you don't want the military. You don't want the military shooting at Americans inside America.
Well, if they are patriots, then
If the military is patriots, yeah, then they won't. But there's a law that said, well, the military will do what it's told to do. Most soldiers will do what they're told to do.
told by government?
Yeah, by the government, yes, exactly. So there's a law that says that in most cases, the military cannot be used inside the United States to enforce domestic laws. And since immigration is a domestic law and the protection of the border is a domestic situation, the military cannot be used to defend the U.S. border. So President Trump sent the National Guard, which is part of the military, down to the border to defend the border. But instead of arresting people, if they see someone coming across the border, illegally, they cannot arrest that person. They cannot stop that person. All they can do is make a phone call to the Border Patrol, who then has to send their people out there to arrest that person. And the military just has to watch. So this report says the National Guard soldiers sent to border are shoveling manure and changing flat tires. Let's see what report this is. This is an article in Political.com. And that's part of the problem. So, yeah, not using the troops to enforce domestic laws sounds like a good idea. For example, during the Civil War, in the North, the draft system was initiated. In other words, instead of just volunteers, at one point the military needed more people to fight the Civil War, so they started requiring people to sign up for military service, or they could buy their way out of it. But a lot of people in New York didn't like that. So in New York City, in Manhattan, there was what called the draft riots. There was riots in New York City. So President Abraham Lincoln used the army to put down those riots. And the army shot at people and killed many people to stop the rioting. So that was in the 1860s. So today, this law prevents the president from doing that kind of a thing. In most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases. Anyway, so in April, President Donald Trump announced he was ordering National Guard troops to the U.S. border with Mexico. We're going to do something militarily, Trump said. Until we can have a wall and proper security, we're going to be guarding our border with the military. But you see, even that statement has a problem, because guarding the border is the job of the Border Patrol, and the military is not allowed to do that. So anyway, this magazine, the Political.com, here in the dilapidated former mining town on the Mexican border, this is Douglas, Arizona, that vague directive has been translated, at least officially, to orders to help quell the smuggling operations in Agua Prieta across the fortified fence and in what is still regarded as one of America's most corrupt locales. They have been carrying out a variety of tasks assisting the U.S. Border Patrol in the months since their initial deployment, but all with one thing in common. They're as far away from the border as possible. In reality, the hundreds of troops deployed in southern Arizona are keeping up the rear, so to speak. In one assignment, soldiers are actually feeding and shoveling out manure from the stalls of the Border Patrol's horses. Back in April, Trump hailed the deployment as a big step, claiming we really haven't done that before, or certainly not very much before. But that isn't accurate either. Both George W. Bush and Barack Obama sent the Guard to the border under similar circumstances. Bush in far larger numbers than Trump, some 6,000 compared with up to 4,000 now, and Obama to the tune of 1,200. So, the president sounds like a good idea. So I've got control of the military. I'm the commander-in-chief, so I'll just send them to the border and just make them line it up, shoulder to shoulder, so that the people cannot come in. But it doesn't work that way. In Arizona, at least, the troops are being kept at an even safer distance than during previous deployments, veterans of past missions say, and assigned supporting roles that can free up Border Patrol agents for field work. Quote, this is the biggest difference from last time when they sent soldiers to a hill and said, hey, look towards the border. Captain Macario Mora of the Arizona National Guard explained to me on a recent visit to the Border Patrol's Douglas Station, which is responsible for 40 miles of the mountainous border and nearly 1,500 square miles that include Douglas, population about 17,000, and its urban terrain of ramshackle homes, warehouses, and junkyards. There is a false narrative that we are doing ride-alongs, Mora said. Ride-along would be where a soldier would be in the same truck, same pickup truck as the Border Patrol. So they go together. He says that's a false narrative. Indeed, the troops are not permitted to take part in patrols or to participate in any operations to detain the men, women, and children being trafficked by criminal organizations across the border or trying to slip undetected into Douglas. None of the troops are even armed. Huh? They sent soldiers, but they didn't send the guns. None of the troops are even armed. And there is no anticipation that will change, Mora told me. Some are helping wherever they can, such as those assigned to tend to the Border Patrol's horses stabled in the area for mounted patrols. Everyone's favorite is Snuggles and Mustang. Other soldiers, like Sergeant Jonathan Sanchez, 35, a cook, are performing maintenance on the Border Patrol's heavily used vehicles. We fix flats, he explained, on a steamy afternoon after completing his shift in the motor pool a few miles north of town. Other troops with proper security clearances have also been given a crash course in how to monitor a network of remote cameras deployed along the border and report anything suspicious, all from the Border Patrol's air-conditioned Tactical Operations Center out on Highway 80. Most have never run a surveillance system like this, Staff Sergeant Thomas Clear said. Thomas Sider. A few National Guard helicopters and crew have also been enlisted to join the Border Patrol fleet for aerial surveillance, but more troops are clearing vegetation, serving as office clerks, and making basic repairs to Border Patrol facilities. They are freeing up some of the 3,600 Border Patrol agents assigned to southern Arizona that normally carry out such tasks for enforcement duties. But it is also a strategy to keep the troops out of trouble. Supervisory Agent Juan Curbelo, a 22-year veteran of the Border Patrol, recounted in the Douglas Station how criminal organizations on the other side of the border have grown more sophisticated and more violent as the U.S. has deployed additional personnel and new technology over the years to make illegal cross-border traffic more difficult. They scout us out quite a bit from the south side, he reported. He was here during the previous National Guard deployment and said that during each iteration of the Border Patrol has been more innovative in finding useful things for the troops to do that keep them from interacting with people crossing the border illegally. The reality, multiple officials related, is that the part-time soldiers are not well suited for what is largely a law enforcement mission, and they worry that inexperienced weekend warriors might, for instance, mistakenly kill civilians or create an international incident. It definitely helps mitigate the risk of the National Guard running into conflict, Mora explained, of what he called the much safer environment they are in miles away from the actual border. It's a lesson learned from those previous National Guard deployments. In 2006, Bush sent 6,000 National Guard troops to the border, but the first time military forces were expressly sent to help staunch illegal immigration as opposed to the illegal drug trade. Then in 2010, Obama, under pressure from lawmakers from border states following the murder of an Arizona rancher, reluctantly dispatched some 1,200 troops to combat smugglers who had become increasingly sophisticated and violent. Trump's order called for as many as 4,000 troops from various states to help police the border stretching from California to Texas. But still casting a shadow over the deployments is the 1997 incident in which a Marine Corps patrol in Texas killed a local sheep herder while on border duty. We learned from each of these deployments, Border Patrol Agent Stephanie Dixon told me in explaining why Guard forces are used so selectively and in support roles. Keeping troops as a rear guard on the border has always been part of the mix, said Tim Dunn, a sociology professor at Salisbury University in Maryland, who has studied previous military deployments to the border. He describes the public message in previous deployments like this: "We are just here to support. We're not going to be out in the field," or "we will be out there in limited way and not in direct contact with the public." But it is even more pronounced this time around, Dunn said. Despite Trump's amped-up rhetoric around immigration and border issues such as drug smuggling, they have reined it in more. Not everyone is happy about it. A major union representing about 15,000 Border Patrol agents has been the most vocal, calling the decision to limit what the troops can do a colossal waste. Last time, said Brandon Judd, the Border Patrol Council's president, they were allowed to do a lot more than they are under the Trump administration. They were allowed to be in lookout and observation posts. They were allowed to be out grading the roads and mending fences. They were allowed to be our eyes and ears, freeing us up. The effort has also been slow going. All right, so they can't even phone that in. They're not even allowed near the border. Morrow said a little over 200 Arizona National Guard troops have been put to work so far, out of this total of 682 that have been authorized. The rest, he said, have yet to arrive due to what is called other training requirements. Finding useful things for them to do has also been a challenge, explained Captain Aaron Thacker, a spokesman for the Arizona National Guard. Deployment includes the process of going through medical evaluations, administrative reviews, ensuring security background checks are up to date if required, and so on and so forth, he said. And then they have to be married up with a job that their skill set can do. Not to mention additional training may be required, he added. The effort is also funded only through September, and it is not clear if the mission, which is mostly paid for out of the Pentagon budget, will continue. But a few of the Guard troops may get down to the border after all. Some are getting recruited, Moria said. I wouldn't be surprised if some become Border Patrol agents. So if you leave the military and become a Border Patrol agent, then you can actually help defend the border. But as long as you're in the military, including the National Guard, you're fixing flat tires and shoveling horse manure. It does seem like a waste, doesn't it? Let's look at that. There was a link to that union representative's statement. Where was that? Okay. This is an LA Times story. Border Patrol Union calls Trump's National Guard deployment a colossal waste. See if LA Times will let me read this. Let me look at it. Okay. Let's see why is it a colossal waste. This was published May 24th. A month after President Trump called for sending National Guard troops to the U.S.-Mexico border, the head of the National Border Patrol Union called the deployment a colossal waste of resources. We have seen no benefit, said Brandon Judd, president of the union that represents 15,000 agents, the National Border Patrol Council. The criticism is a dramatic departure for the group, which endorsed Trump's candidacy for president and has praised his border security efforts, including National Guard deployments. When I found out the National Guard was going to be on the border, I was extremely excited, Judd said, because previous deployments on the border helped alleviate the Border Patrol's workload. Okay, trying to get down to the next part of the article. But let's see. Having trouble to do that. I got too many pages trying to refresh. at the same time. All right, so my screen is temporarily frozen. All right, so anyway, let's take a break, and I'll straighten things out, and we'll be back with the last segment after this.
Hi there, folks, and look at what I've got here today. My God, take a look at this. This is a BFR in 454 Casull with an octagonal barrel, Magna porting, micarta grips. And look at that, it even has my initials on it, JM. Look at that thing of beauty, my God. Pop open the cartridge insertion door, and look at that cylinder spin. The finest revolvers in the world. That's a cannon. That's a cannon. Oh, man. Pretty accurate, though. Pretty much on target. Oh boy! Massive repo.
All right, welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, June 16th, 2018. And we were talking about an opinion being expressed by the head of the Border Patrol Union. And this union supports President Trump, but they're not happy with the way that the National Guard has been deployed to the border. He was very excited when this was first announced, but he says that's actually not working out. He says, in the past, he said that the National Guard helped to relieve the workload of the Border Patrol agents, but this time he says that's not happening at all. About 1,600 National Guard troops were deployed on the border. About 750 more troops may soon be added in support roles, and the total could reach 4,000 based on requests for assistance and what they need, said Army Lieutenant Colonel Jamie Davis, a Pentagon spokesman. We want to match the right number of troops to do the jobs that are needed, and not just provide a certain number of troops, Davis said. Davis declined to comment on the remarks by the Border Patrol Union. A Border Patrol spokesman said National Guard troops had assisted with 3,924 deportations, 1,116 turnbacks of migrants into Mexico, and the seizure of 3,486 pounds of marijuana, all by operating support technology and equipment. She said they had replaced some Border Patrol agents at observation posts. Instead of an agent watching a camera, they can, she said. Border Patrol and National Guard officials from Arizona and Texas held a briefing several weeks into the deployment to praise it as a force multiplier, although they did not say how many agents the deployment had freed to patrol the border. They noted that troops stationed at observation posts on the border in Texas were part of a separate operation, that those sent by the National Guard were not allowed to observe anything inside Mexico, even remotely via surveillance equipment, because that's considered spying. See that? You cannot look over the Rio Grande River into Mexico to see whether anyone is coming towards the border, because that would be spying. Border Patrol acting, I guess it's spying if it's done by the military, I guess. Border Patrol Acting Chief Carla Provost responded to the union's claims by acknowledging that the National Guard's role has changed compared with past deployments. Although they have been deployed to the border, they have to be paired with an agent who has law enforcement powers, and Border Patrol and defense officials decided it was better to use them because behind the scenes for surveillance and air support. I want my agents out in the front line of enforcing the laws, a provost said Thursday during a visit to the agency's Rio Grande Valley headquarters. She said pairs of agents use aerostat blimps to monitor the border remotely, and when troops have replaced one agent, it frees another to patrol. As they learn and get certain experience down, more agents will be able to go to the line, Provost said. Katie Waldman, a Homeland Security spokesman based in Washington, added, while the National Guard deployment has not yet reached full capacity, it has clearly and unquestionably been a success, with thousands of additional apprehensions and millions of dollars of drugs kept out of the country. The third request for assistance to deploy additional guardsmen in support of the mission to secure the southern border was recently authorized and is being implemented. More help is on the way. Well, of course, the bureaucrats and politicians are going to always paint this in a positive light. But the head of the union is saying, you know what, this is not working. This is not, in the past, some good was being done, but this time I'm not so sure, he's saying. So, and the bureaucrats say, no, we've got all these, there are many ways to come up with those numbers. A Pentagon official who asked not to be named because of the sensitivity of the topic noted that governors in the 4 border states where National Guard troops were deployed, Arizona, California, New Mexico, and Texas, set the terms of engagement. The overall support is to the mission, but they're going to be parceled out differently by state. He said, but it hasn't been a significant change under George Bush, Obama, and now Trump. They're different in how they're perceived. There's no different in what they're doing. He added the National Guard is always cost-effective. Border Patrol union members disagreed. The last time the National Guard was deployed to the border, in Texas in 2014 and border-wide in 2010, troops assumed Border Patrol posts for the front lines, easing the workload, Judd said. Although National Guard members were restricted to an observe and report rule and couldn't detain migrants, they still aided patrols. Quote, they were allowed to do a lot more than they are under the Trump administration. They were allowed to be in lookout and observation posts. They were allowed to be out grading the roads and mending fences. They were allowed to be our eyes and ears, freeing us up, Judd said. The deployment, he said, has proved to be far more limited, despite the Trump administration's claims. They're not allowed to be in the public eye. They're not allowed to be in our lookout and observation posts, even in Texas, he said, the busiest area of the border for migrants and drug smuggling. Judd said agents had complained about the restrictions to National Guard commanders, but they just ignored the concerns. We generally support the administration, but we're not going to be cheerleading when things are not going well, Judd said. And I think that's the right thing to do, yeah. He needs to complain. So that's what's going on the border, and I think President Trump's intention is not being carried out there. President Trump thought that the military could be used to supplement to be a force multiplier for the Border Patrol, but according to the Border Patrol agents on the ground, that's not happening. Of course, the bureaucrats in Washington and the Pentagon and so forth will always put a good picture on it because that's what they're paid to do, and that's what that's their training to put a good picture on things that are not going well. But that situation is important. Immigration has been described as one of the most important issues in the upcoming midterm elections. And President Trump has been trying to do something about it, trying to get a wall built, trying to get a proper immigration bill. But right now, even that is not working very well. I just wanted to look up the Rasmussen Daily poll for President Trump. He's been about 50%. And very similar to the level where Obama was at the same time in his presidency. And this is something that the mainstream media definitely does not report. They make it look as though nobody loves Trump and everybody wants him out. But of course, that only applies to the people inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. or in New York. The Rasmussen Reports daily presidential tracking poll for Friday shows that 47% of likely U.S. voters approve of President Trump's job performance, 51% disapprove. So that's the result for Friday. And it goes up and down. But when we compare that, look at the chart comparing that with President Obama. Let's see, the green is above the blue. So who's green and who's blue? Yeah, so Trump is the green. So Trump is above Obama, yeah. At this time, Obama had 45% approval. Interesting. Okay. So Trump a little bit above Obama at this time of his presidency, but the media really loved Obama. Obama was given a Nobel Peace Prize when he began his presidency. And then he went and started wars or increased wars in Syria and Afghanistan and several other places. But the press still believes that Obama was a great president, and they believe that it is their responsibility to protect his reputation, Obama's reputation, and Obama's legacy, even though the American people said otherwise in electing President Trump. This battle between the people who want to turn the United States into a centralized government with a complete power in Washington, an effective communist system, and people who want local sovereignty, this battle will continue. And there's possibility that it will get worse before it gets better. So we have to always be speaking up and be participating and understand what's going on in terms of the elections this year, in terms of if your state is still having primaries, get involved in those primary elections. We've already finished the primaries here in Pennsylvania, and we're getting ready to do something in November to elect people in November who will serve God's purpose. All right, thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Yura, for coming forward today. And this is going to be a warmer day, at least here in this part of Pennsylvania. I hope that people will get out, no matter what the weather is in your area. Get out and enjoy nature, even if it's raining. The rain is good. The rain is good, right? Rain is good. And I hope that the people who slept at the Inspector General's farm last night had a good night. And I hope that they probably didn't. They probably got very little sleep. They were probably so excited and talking through the night. They probably got maybe a couple hours of sleep, I suspect. Anyway, so God bless, Godspeed, and may His kingdom come.